I hope you have a great experience this afternoon. And if you want to engage with the team with questions in real time as we're going along, there's a Q&A button down in the bottom right for me. That's where it is. And you can just click on there and enter your thoughts, your questions as we go. And we'll do our best to get to all of them.
Tracy, we want to get started now with maybe just the introductions and kind of walking people through the format for today. I think that'd be great as other people start rolling in. Thanks.
I would be very happy to do that. So welcome one and all. My name's Tracy L. and I will be the facilitator for this session. And welcome to the second of 2 virtual open houses for the official plan review. We met last Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. and the materials being presented this afternoon are exactly the same. What's different are you, the participants, and the questions that you may have. So the focus of today's get-together will be on the proposed updates to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan to ensure its conformity with provincial land use planning policies, as well as proposed policy and zoning changes to address Council's direction for the no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. So I just wanted to check with Lauren to see whether we are going to be recording this session at some point.
Yes, I'm recording right now, and it will be available in a few days after this session.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much. So just so everybody's on the same page there, and we'll start with the land acknowledgement. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase, 1792, between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. So I would like to tell you how we're going to spend our next 2 hours together. As I mentioned, I will be facilitating. I'm grateful to be doing so. And so I'll be the time and process keeper, and we'll create a real positive space for everybody to get their questions answered as best as we can. The format is short presentations followed by Q&A, questions and answers, so you don't have to hold on to them for too long. The presentations are each about 5 minutes or so. You'll use the question and answers function on WebEx to enter your questions and ideas at any time. And we'll do our best to group similar questions so we can answer as many as possible. As Lauren mentioned, the session presentation is being recorded, and the recording, along with a questions and answers document that we'll be creating following this session, and a consultation report that brings together the questions and answers from both sessions, will be posted on the Engage Hamilton page for this project, which is found at engage.hamilton.ca/grids2mcr. Questions that come up after the session or ideas that you may have should be and can be and are welcome to be invited to be sent to this grids2-mcr@hamilton.ca email address, and staff will be receiving those as they come in. So let's meet everybody. When I say staff, who do I mean? This is the great team that is with us today to provide information and answers. So we have Heather Travis, she's the Senior Project Manager. And if the last experience is correct, she will be answering many of these questions, which is great. Delia McPhail, Policy Planner, and she's going to be the lead on the presentation. Then we have Lauren Reitz, who is the wonderful coordinator of this process, and she's a policy planner. We have Christine Newbold. Where's Christine? There you are. Hi, Christine. And she's the manager of the long range planning team. So we also have some people from Zoning and Committee of Adjustment, the Zoning Reform team. We have Alana Fulford, who's a planner, and she's also going to be presenting. Hey, Alana, nice to see you. And Shannon McKee, who is a manager in that section. So hello and welcome. And I'm joined today by Jody Ball, and she really helps to keep us on track, let us know which questions we haven't quite answered yet, and will be really instrumental in creating some great documentation coming out of this session. Okay, so next I'm going to show you the agenda so you know where to from here. This slide shows our agenda, and we're going to begin with an introduction to the Municipal Comprehensive Review of the city's urban and rural Hamilton official plans, briefly highlighting the legislative requirements, Council's direction on managing growth, as well as the approach taken by staff to conduct the review of the city's official plans. And then we're going to move on to reviewing highlights of the proposed changes on a topic area basis, taking time to answer questions along the way. So the topics have been grouped. For example, provincial plans, housing and employment, we'll hear about that first, followed by a number of other topic areas. And then finally, section 3 will share with you the next steps in this first phase of the official plan review. And as you can see there again, there's a Q&A in each section. So at this point, and without further ado, I want to turn it over to Delia McPhail to provide a brief overview of why the city's reviewing its official plans, how we got to this point, and where we're going to go from here. So over to you, Delia.
Thank you, Tracy. Based on the requirements of the Provincial Policy Statement and the Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe and good land use planning practice, municipalities review their official plans on a regular basis to ensure they remain up to date, reflect current provincial policy, and represent the long-term vision of the municipality. The Rural Hamilton Official Plan and Urban Hamilton Official Plan were approved by the Ontario Municipal Board and came into effect in 2012 and 2013, respectively. The Municipal Comprehensive Review is the means by which municipalities update the official plans to ensure conformity with recently updated provincial land use planning policies. Unlike other official plan amendments adopted by Hamilton City Council that are exempt, official plan amendments that implement the Municipal Comprehensive Review require the approval of the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Concurrently with completing the MCR, the city has been completing an update to its growth management strategy known as GRIDS 2 to plan for provincially forecasted population and job growth to the year 2051. The slide on the screen identifies the different interrelated components of the MCR and GRIDS 2 processes. Many of the studies that are required as part of the MCR are also part of a growth strategy. The outcome of the MCR and GRIDS 2 will be implemented through official plan amendments to the urban and rural Hamilton official plans, which is what we are discussing today. In November 2021, through Grids 2 and the MCR, Council approved a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario to accommodate all forecasted population and employment growth within the existing urban area to the year 2051. As part of this Municipal Comprehensive Review, this conformity amendment implements the no urban boundary expansion growth scenario by removing current policies and mapping that would allow for a future urban boundary expansion and to plan for and manage growth within the existing urban area. Changes to the city's existing low-density residential zones are also proposed and will be discussed later in the presentation. The province has set July 1st, 2022 as the deadline for municipalities to submit official plan amendments to bring their official plans into conformity with the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Therefore, the city has taken a phased approach to the review of the city's official plans. We are currently in Phase 1, which involves the review of the Urban Hamilton official plan to bring it into conformity with the provincial land use planning policies. This phase also includes changes to both the urban and rural Hamilton official plans necessary to implement Council's direction for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. Phase 2 will involve the review of the rural Hamilton official plan to bring it into conformity with provincial policy statement, the Greenbelt Plan, and the Niagara Escarpment Plan. This stage will also involve refinements to the agricultural and natural heritage system mapping. Phase 3 will be the review of the urban and rural Hamilton official plans dealing with local matters, such as urban design, waste management, parks, and recreation. Updates tied to the residential zoning project, as well as further updates related to implementing Council's direction for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario, will also be included in this third phase. The fourth and final phase will include the delineation of major transit station areas and associated density targets along the B line, and the possibility of inclusionary zoning policies to further support the development of affordable housing. As the provincial land use planning policy framework comprises a wide range of matters, the city has approached the review of the official plans on a topic basis, in light of policy updates to the provincial policy statement and provincial growth plan. By organizing updates on a topic area basis, we were able to identify official plan policies that already conform with provincial policies, as well as those policies that require updating to conform to provincial policies. Before we get into the details of proposed updates, I would like to take this opportunity to answer any questions you may have about the Municipal Comprehensive Review that I've just provided.
I want to let everybody know that the questions that you may have submitted in advance, we have them all in front of us here. And what I've done is gone back and grouped them by subject area. So, for example, there were a number of them related to parking. So we'll get to those under the transportation related section. And we didn't have any submitted in advance related to this particular section. However, Delia and Heather, there were a number that are coming in now. So I'll just go to those ones then. The first one is it true that Hamilton Council will review the need for boundary expansion annually? And if that's the case, how does that work with moving change forward pre the 5-year provincial review?
So I'll start by answering that question. No, I don't believe the council will be reviewing the urban boundary discussion on an annual basis. Municipal comprehensive reviews are required 10 years after the initial official plan is adopted by council, such as the urban and rural Hamilton official plans. And every 5 years thereafter, council would conduct a comprehensive municipal review of its official plans. So in terms of revisiting these policies, I would say no, only at the time of a municipal comprehensive review will council reconsider this boundary adjustment. I wonder if there's any other comments that Heather might like to provide. Just take yourself off mute, Heather, please.
That would help. No, you're absolutely correct, Delia. Council will not be reviewing this decision on an annual basis, and it will not be reviewed again until the next municipal comprehensive review. Thank you.
Okay, there's just a quick follow-up here. And what is it? Did council agree to review something annually at their meeting in 2021 in November? And was there not a motion stipulating this by the mayor, for example, when he voted against the no expansion?
Yes, that's correct. So council did direct staff to review on an annual basis a number of different parameters relating to how the city is growing. So reviewing on an annual basis our rates of intensification, our number of housing units developed, type of housing units that are being developed, building permits, development within our greenfield areas to look at the densities that we're achieving in those areas, as well as some direction to look at housing affordability. So that was a motion that was put forward by the mayor and then supplemented by another councillor as data that the city or staff will be tracking and then reporting on an annual basis.
Okay, and that's different than looking at the boundary expansion. Those are discrete other pieces that will be looked at each year, if I'm remembering or hearing correctly. Yes, okay.
That's correct.
Awesome. Now, we had this question on Thursday as well. What are the what's the timelines for the phases? The person's wondering whether they need to be all four done by July 1st, 2022.
I can answer that question. The first phase is focusing on updates to the Urban Hamilton official plan, and then those updates related to the council's decision for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario that are related to the rural Hamilton official plan. The updates to bring the rural Hamilton official plan into conformity with the provincial policies that you'll see in a few slides later towards the end of the presentation, that will be taking place in this spring of 2023. Okay, so no, the local context and looking at more local community matters, matters that are more local in focus will take place around the same time. Just the Urban Hamilton official plan updates to bring it into conformity with the provincial policies is what's needed for July 1st, 2022.
Thank you. And Delia, maybe you can explain why this one plan has to have such a long time horizons. How can one plan be for 20 years into the future?
So the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe has projected employment and population growth forecasts for the next 30 years. And so how is it that we're able to do that? The province tells us that we need to plan for that period of time. So as I said earlier, every 5 years, the city will need to review its official plan to see if there are any other updates necessary to make sure that we're achieving those goals of meeting the needs of that population and employment growth. So we're going to be doing a review every 5 years.
Okay. And does the no urban boundary expansion scenario conform to provincial policies and the market demand direction given by the province?
I think I'll let Heather answer that question. Heather has been the lead in the Grids 2 process, and that is where the council made the decision about the no urban boundary growth expansion growth scenario.
Yeah, thanks, Delia. So as I think Delia mentioned briefly in her introduction, the official plan amendment that we're discussing today, and which is implementing that council decision, to accommodate all of our growth within our existing urban area, that needs to be approved by the province. So ultimately, our local council will approve the official plan amendment, but it will not be considered final and binding until the province also issues approval. So it will be at that point when the province is reviewing our official plan amendment that they will be reviewing it to determine that it does conform to provincial policy and that it conforms to the market demand, the requirements of satisfying market demand and providing for a full range of housing types. So that is something that the province will be looking at when they review this official plan amendment. And I cannot speak to what decision they will make. That will be something that will be forthcoming in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And maybe this one kind of flows with it. How are the various inputs being weighted in this process in your thinking compared to those provincial mandates?
Sorry, Tracy, I was just trying to read that question so I could. Oh, okay.
It's near the top.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that question is. Perhaps getting to. The question says, how are the various inputs weighted in compared to the provincial mandates? So we are required to conform to all of the provincial policies that Delia mentioned. We're required to update our official plan to conform to be consistent with the provincial policy statement and conform to the growth plan. So that provides a lot of direction. And, there's not a lot of wiggle room, you could say, in how we update our policies to conform to those provincial directions. We're required to do so. And so that does form a large component of the amendment that we're bringing forward right now and that we're consulting on is those provincial plan updates. In addition, though, we have brought forward, and Delia will get into this in a lot more detail later in the presentation, we've brought forward updates to our plans and also proposed updates to our existing zoning bylaws to implement that council direction for a no urban boundary expansion scenario. And so those updates relate to increased density permissions within some of our neighborhoods, within our medium density areas, and corresponding zoning changes, increases to our density targets, again, with an aim to facilitating a great deal of intensification and development within our existing urban area. And so those are also important policy updates that are not driven by the provincial conformity matter, but are driven by the council decision to focus all of our growth within the urban area. And that's how it's a first stage of our implementation of that council decision. And as I said, Delia will get into a lot more detail on that in a few topics from now.
Okay, and Heather, you'll see I'm kind of jumping around trying to link like questions a little bit. So the next one is related to urban development has already taken place around Nebo Road, 20 Road East, and the airport. Why would the remaining lands in these areas not be infilled to become part of the city?
So I can speak.
Oh yeah, go ahead,
Sorry.
Delia. Go ahead,
I
Delia.
was just going to say that although it may look like farmland is being replaced with urban development, those lands that have been described in the Nebo and 20 Road East area and the airport areas have already been identified as being within the urban area. Subject in the case of the airport employment growth district, there's a secondary plan guiding development in that area. In the other area around Nebo and 20 Road is a business park. And as services and other things are being extended, those lands which are already designated urban are being developed. So that is something to bear in mind, that even though on the ground it may not look like it's urban, it's already been approved for urban uses.
Okay, thank you. And how is the Ontario Land Tribunal, affectionately known as OLT in planning lingo, what policy work is being done in relation to this to mitigate against OLT involvement?
So as you said, Tracy, OLT is the Ontario Land Tribunal, and that is the body before which any appeals against planning decisions are taken, and it's a provincial tribunal. However, in this case, because this work that we're bringing forward right now is being completed as part of a municipal comprehensive review, this official plan amendment will be passed under Section 26 of the Planning Act, which doesn't mean a lot for lay folks, but what it does mean, and what is very important, is it means it cannot be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So should this official plan amendment that we're dealing with today be approved by our council and then ultimately approved by the province, there is no rights of appeal from either private landowners or from the city. We also could not appeal any decisions that the province makes in this regard.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let's see here. There are a couple more here. Climate change preparedness is still quite vague. Now, that's a question we can talk about later on because we do have a climate change section specifically, so I'm going to hold that one. When will the province be doing their review?
So we've already provided the province, the staff at Municipal Affairs and Housing, with a copy of the proposed amendments to the urban and rural Hamilton official plans. This is something that we are looking for 90 days. Within 90 days, the province has a review period within which to ask questions of the municipality, to provide comments back to us. They're not obligated to provide comments back to us, but once those 90 days have been completed, we can then hold statutory open houses and a statutory open house and statutory public meeting for the council consideration and then adoption of the official plan amendment. So that's where we are now, and later on in the presentation we'll get into some of those details of the dates and what we expect from the province when.
Thank you. Okay. There's a couple more here. Since Hamilton did not achieve its provincial growth targets previously, are checks and balances being incorporated into this in order to focus on holistic development?
Yeah, I can take that one, Delia. I assume this question is speaking about the provincial population and employment targets that all municipalities are required to plan to achieve, and they're provided on a 10-year basis. Hamilton actually has been fairly on track with our population forecast. We've been with a very small variance of the provincial growth forecast on the population side. On the employment side, we are lagging behind, but that is very typical of all municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, where the employment numbers traditionally have been a lot higher. There was a lot stronger employment growth forecasted originally by the province, and only Toronto was actually keeping up with those higher forecasts. So we'll see in the future with the revised forecast now how the city achieves the revised employment forecast. But on the population side, we have actually been trending very closely with the provincial population targets. And in terms of checks and balances, so that's really what that motion from the mayor that we talked about earlier is speaking to. It's providing on an annual basis. Staff will be reporting publicly, so through planning committee, reporting on how we are achieving growth targets, both population, employment, as I said, intensification, density targets, unit types. We'll be reporting all of that information on an annual basis, and then that information that we will be collecting as we go forward will help inform our next municipal comprehensive review and official plan review process, and help us determine if we need to tweak anything. We'll give council information to see if the decision that's being made right now is something that should be carried forward and through the next official plan review, or at that time if there will be a need to open up the discussion again on urban boundary expansion. These are things that we don't know right now, but by providing that annual growth forecasting and monitoring, it'll help to inform those future discussions.
Thank you. A number of these questions relate to topics that are coming, so I'm going to not preempt the presentation by asking them now. But what I'll ask is for people who whose questions haven't been answered, because I believe they slot in nicely with future topics, if you would then kind of cut and paste in the appropriate topic areas, that would be great. Now, you don't know what's coming, but let me just tell you, we're going to talk about housing, employment, cultural heritage, transportation, climate-related topics, infrastructure, growth management, and zoning. So there are some zoning and climate questions in here, for example, that we will hold over to the presentation segments. The last one that I believe fits here is what justification was used by City Council to reject planning staff recommendations in light of all of the work that had been done by staff related to analyzing and understanding future requirements. So I'm not sure whether we need to point people back to council meetings specifically for those specifics, but go ahead, Heather.
Sure, thanks, Tracy. I think the question was what justification did council use? Is that what it was? Yeah, I would
Yes.
agree, Tracy, that so the discussion on Hamilton's growth strategy and council selecting a preferred growth option took place at General Issues Committee meetings in November of this year, with the decision being issued at the November 19th Special General Issues Committee. So certainly there's an opportunity if anybody's interested to go online and listen to those discussions for themselves, and you can hear a lot of the discussion. There was a great deal of public delegations, and there was a lot of discussion about about the city's ability to accommodate all of its growth within our existing urban area and opportunities to increase planned intensification and planned densities within our urban area. So I can't speak to what individual councillors considered when they made their decision, but that's what a lot of the discussion focused on at those meetings, was those opportunities within our existing urban area that could be explored to accommodate growth.
Thank you. And those, if I'm not mistaken, are those meeting recordings posted online for people to take a look at if they want to do that?
Yes, they are. If they go to council meetings and agendas, they can look up General Issues Committee meeting, November of 2021, and you'll see Heather had mentioned some of those dates if you look in the calendar.
Okay, and we can provide a link in our documentation just in case people do in fact want to go back to some of the historic precursor to this. But as for now, we best in terms of timing move on to the next section. I know there's questions there as well, so please go ahead.
Okay, so now we'd like to take you through some of the notable updates to the official plans based on the topic areas identified. In most cases, we've grouped similar topic areas together for discussion purposes, and this is by no means a comprehensive detail of all of the changes, but we're just providing highlights at this point. You can see all of these detailed updates on our OP Review webpage or on Engage Hamilton. So we'd now like to begin by highlighting proposed updates within the provincial plans, housing, and employment topic areas. The first topic area we wish to discuss is that of provincial plans. In 2015, the province of Ontario began what is known as the coordinated review of its provincial planning policy documents. Following this review in 2017, the province updated the Greenbelt Plan, the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and the Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Since that time, the Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe was further updated in 2019 and again in 2020. The current provincial policy statement was released in 2020. Updates to the Urban and Hamilton Official Plan include policy references to the updated provincial plans and mapping corrections within Volume 1. Within Volume 2, Secondary Plans, Policy and Mapping changes to the Fruitland-Winona Secondary Plan and Land Use Plan are also necessary to reflect lands that were removed from the Greenbelt Plan through the coordinated review. Other mapping updates to implement the Greenbelt Planning mapping changes will occur through Phase 2 of the Official Plan Review in the Rural Hamilton Official Plan Conformity Updates, which I mentioned is the next phase, Phase 2 of our review. Finally, there are a series of glossary updates to reflect new and revised provincial definitions. New definitions include such terms as impacts of a changing climate, green infrastructure, low impact development, and complete streets, among others, while some definitions were updated to provide further clarification, such as adding motorized mobility devices to the term active transportation. Let's now move on to the housing topic area. Policy updates to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan that fall under the housing topic area include updates to reflect the Housing and Homelessness Action Plan, updated housing targets for affordable rental housing units, and new ownership housing that is affordable to low and moderate income households, including housing with supports. Other updates include planning for a mix of housing forms, types, and densities to meet market-based and affordable housing needs of current and future residents, as well as encouraging the creation of family-sized dwelling units, those with a higher number of bedrooms, in multiple dwellings. A policy has been added to address the PPS policy requiring the city to maintain the ability to accommodate residential growth for a minimum of 15 years through residential intensification and redevelopment within the city's urban area, and where new development is to occur, there should be zoning in place to facilitate residential intensification to meet a 3-year supply of available residential units. The residential intensification criteria provided in Chapter B is proposed to be expanded to address such matters as transit supportive development and sustainable design elements, as well as references to existing or planned active transportation and the availability and location of existing and proposed public community facilities. Given Council's decision for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario and the need to accommodate all projected population growth within the urban area, additional policy updates to facilitate residential intensification throughout the urban area will be included in the discussion of the urban structure topic area. The last topic area within this section is that of employment. The growth plan has introduced a new term, provincially significant employment zones. Many of the city's existing employment areas are classified as provincially significant employment zones. The policy updates therefore identify and map these areas while recognizing that all employment areas contribute to the local economy. New policies encourage the efficient use and intensification of existing employment areas to increase employment densities and connections with active transportation. The growth plan has also required the city to establish minimum employment density targets broken down by employment designation. The city's employment density targets will plan to achieve an overall density of 29 jobs per hectare by the year 2051. The proposed draft official plan amendment includes mapping and policy changes to implement the employment land conversions previously approved by Council in August 2021, as the conversion of employment lands to non-employment designations may only be converted through a municipal comprehensive review. Finally, the provincial policy statement has introduced new land use compatibility requirements between employment and sensitive land uses, requiring that they be planned and developed to avoid and minimize risk to public health and safety, and include new requirements related to land use compatibility studies. At this time, we'd like to answer any questions you may have about the provincial plans, housing, or employment topic area updates.
Okay, so we did have a couple that were submitted prior to the meeting, so I will review those at this time. What is the process for allowing small plots of land that is less than 20 acres within the existing white belt areas to be developed for residential or commercial use?
Thanks, Tracy. So for the benefit of those in the call, white belt lands are lands that are not within our urban area. So they're not within the Greenbelt plan, but they are still designated rural within our official plan. So they cannot be developed for urban uses. I believe maybe this question is speaking to a policy that's in the provincial growth plan that allows for what I guess are considered minor urban boundary expansions up to a maximum of 40 hectares outside of a municipal comprehensive review process. So that's a provincial policy. Because of Council's direction for no urban boundary expansion and to accommodate all of our growth within our urban area, staff are proposing to add a policy to our urban official plan that states essentially states, regardless of that provincial policy direction, we are not allowing any expansions 40 hectares or less, really expansions of any size outside of a municipal comprehensive review process. So that was a bit of a long answer, but the short answer is there is no process for allowing these smaller urban boundary expansions to take place because council has stated their decision for no urban boundary expansions to accommodate our growth. Thank you.
Okay. And the next question is related to seniors aging in place. What is the age breakdown in the proposed city population growth? This makes a difference in the type of housing required. Many seniors are not moving from 3-bedroomed houses as not enough smaller accessible housing is available in their neighborhoods.
I can start on that one. We do have age structure breakdown that is included as part of the provincial growth forecasts to provide our growth by age cohort going forward for the next 30 years. So that is something that we can provide and perhaps link to when we post this Q&A information online. There certainly is, or we do see an increase in the senior age cohorts as we go forward with more seniors in our population. And so I think really when you're going to hear a bit more in the presentation later from Delia and from our zoning team about increasing options for housing within our neighborhoods and increasing types of housing available within our neighborhoods. And I think that is something that really does speak to this need or could help address the need for seniors to be able to move out of their larger single family homes and into an alternative housing option within their neighborhood and really age in place, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you. And that dovetails nicely into this next question. Is there any consideration being given to maximum sizes of single family residents? The person notes that we learned in Portland, Oregon, their intensification policies are considering these limits to sizes to ensure efficient use of densified lands.
To date, we haven't had that discussion here internally. You will see some proposed policy and zoning updates that we are proposing to make as part of this this round of conformity in our first official plan amendment going to the province. At least on the official plan side, we haven't had any discussions about limiting the size of single detached dwellings through this update. That being said, we are still looking at an intensification strategy going forward, and over the course of the next year or so, we'll be looking at what other potential policy and zoning updates do we need to put in place to encourage intensification throughout our built-up area, throughout our urban area, really. And as Delia had mentioned previously, there may be further updates related to that intensification strategy in future phases of this official plan review. So nothing is proposed at this time. I don't know if our zoning team has any other comments on that question, but if you want to add anything, please go ahead. Otherwise, stay tuned for future discussions.
Yeah, Heather, I think I would just echo what you've said. To date, we haven't had any conversations about that, but as this policy framework moves forward and through the implementation and the new development of residential zones, that's where we would be discussing and reviewing that sort of step.
Thank you. I noticed there are some zoning related questions in here, but I'm going to hold those over to the zoning section, which has a lot of great information in it. There are a couple questions related to employment lands that we will do next. Can you please speak to next steps for the employment land needs given the no urban boundary expansion option and the deferred properties for consideration for conversion in the GRIDS 2 process?
Unmute. I will take that one, Tracy, since that is related to the GRIDS process. Again, for those on the call, so part of the GRIDS growth strategy update did look at requests for converting existing employment lands, so business park lands or industrial areas, within the city to a non-employment use. We can only do that. We as a city can only consider that conversion of land from an employment use to non-employment through this municipal comprehensive review exercise. So we did take forward a report to our council in August 2021 with staff recommendations on most of the requests for conversion that we had received from landowners through that process. But there are still several outstanding requests that for different reasons we couldn't make a recommendation on in August. So those are being reviewed right now, and we do propose to be bringing forward a recommendation report on those remaining requests on a date to be determined. I don't have the exact date yet, and I know there's probably people on this call who that's what they're looking for, but we will follow up directly with those who have outstanding requests and let them know the date. It would likely be toward the end of April when that report would be going forward. And of course, we will also make that publicly available so all members of the public can have access to that report and those final recommendation on those employment land conversions when it's ready.
Thank you. And you did answer a couple of questions all in one, so nice work. How is the official plan addressing the overwhelming number of empty parking lots in the city as options for development or redevelopment?
So the development process is typically landowner driven. So if landowners who own those vacant parking lots or vacant lands submit development applications, then we would process those here at the city and make recommendations to council on those. So hopefully through these updated policies and providing a framework that would encourage intensification and redevelopment, we will see more of those parking lots being replaced by development.
Thank you. And I think you partially answered one of the other questions as well, but it is asking specifically about whether there is prioritization to approving new communities on lands on the outskirts of the city. Sorry, let me say that again. Is there a plan for redeveloping and remediating pre-existing urban areas prior to approving new communities on the outskirts? My apologies.
Not a problem. I'll go ahead, Delia. I know that you could probably speak to that one as well. Similar to what Delia just said is that throughout much of our existing urban area, within commercial areas, within our nodes and corridors, including the downtown and our other major commercial areas within the city, we do have policies and zoning in place that allow us for redevelopment to occur. And we've put as permissive policies and zoning in place as we can to allow that flexibility for landowners to come forward and develop their property. The city does have incentive programs as well related to remediation of properties that may have contamination, again, to try to incentivize property owners to come forward and developing their lands. But again, as Delia noted, it is a developer-driven process. So we cannot obligate somebody to come forward with an application. That has to be the property owner's desire to do so. But we have put in place the policies and the zoning and other tools to try to encourage that to happen.
Thank you. And I think you answered the incentivization question as well there, which is great. Does the official plan preemptively address Hamilton's need for family housing policies in urban central areas? So 3 to 4 bedroom units, for example, with amenities and green spaces and so on.
So the official plan is a policy document that is a high-level policy document. We do have policies being brought forward that, as part of this conformity review, that will encourage family-sized 3 or 4 bedroom units within multiple dwellings. And so we're providing that. In terms of amenities and green space, yes, generally speaking, the policies would encourage that. But when it gets down to the details of how much is being provided, that is something that would be coming through the zoning bylaw amendments that will be necessary to facilitate and implement these policy updates. So I would suggest that once these policies updates have been approved by the province to encourage greater unit numbers, that there will be some implementation tools like the zoning bylaw and other methods perhaps as well, as staff are looking at how to encourage family-friendly housing.
And I just add to that too, staff are going to be actually consulting on a family-friendly housing discussion paper that's been prepared, looking specifically at this issue of how to encourage family-size units within developments going forward. And I believe that consultation will be taking place in March or April of this year through Engage Hamilton. So you can keep an eye out for that. And of course, that discussion paper and the outcome of that public engagement may translate into future additional official plan policy updates during a future phase of the official plan review.
Okay, thank you. Just two more questions. The first one is on housing topic with respect to affordability. The prices of purchasing a home continue to rise as the inventory decreases. Wouldn't allowing more houses to be built bring down the prices?
I can start with that one. I think that's the question of does an increase in supply, impact on affordability and bring those housing prices down? And I think that's a question a lot of people ask. I don't know that it's ever been conclusively proven that that is the case, but I'm certainly not an expert in that field. I do recall speaking to our land economist, Anthony Lorius, who was assisting with our land needs assessment throughout our grids process, and he had noted that certainly bringing additional supply into our urban area doesn't hurt the affordability issue. It certainly doesn't make it any worse, but does it significantly improve the situation that we're dealing with the affordable housing and the skyrocketing prices of new homes in our area? Likely not significantly. I think housing affordability is something that has to be dealt with through multiple fronts, and there's not one easy answer or one simple solution that is going to see us be able to address that issue. So again, I'm not an expert in that field, but that's my understanding of the question of supply and affordability. But I think it's something that's continually going to be open for debate going forward.
Mm-hmm. And affordable housing is certainly a topic of interest for people who are participating in this session. And here's another one that just came in on the topic. If the process of development is driven by developers, how can the city encourage developers to build within the urban boundary?
Well, again, I'll start. Delia, you can add if you like, or Christine, anybody else on the call. Frankly, we're not proposing any urban boundary expansions. That's the council direction, and that's what we're implementing through these amendments. So there is no other opportunity but to develop within our existing urban area. That is where the development opportunities lie within the city of Hamilton. We talked about the different incentives that the city has put in place through flexible zoning, through trying to expedite development approvals, financial incentives to try to encourage more development to occur within our urban area. And then especially regarding affordable housing, that's something that is still being looked at. That's an ongoing issue that we're looking at. I think Delia mentioned in the first section that a future phase of our official plan amendments will be looking at inclusionary zoning within our major transit station areas. So that's an example of one single tool that we could look at going forward that would help us ensure that when development occurs that we have a certain amount of affordable units within those developments. So that's one example. But as I said, I think affordable housing is it's a multi-pronged issue, and there's going to have to be many solutions, not a single one, to helping us deal with that issue going forward.
I'd just like to add a few things to that, Heather.
Sure.
In terms of encouraging development within our existing urban boundary, lots of our planning, the majority, if not all of our planning, is about making good communities, complete communities where there is parks and open space and transit. So by doing the planning for those components as well and making sure our land use and our intensification areas are supported by those important elements of a community, we hope that that provides incentives for, or at least encourages the development community to come forward and build in those areas. So, but ultimately, as we mentioned before, it is the choice of the development community where they choose to purchase property and develop.
Okay, and as part of this redevelopment scenario, is the city looking at any expropriation of areas with vacant or very low density housing for redevelopment?
Not that I'm aware of. Christine, I don't know if you have anything to add on that one.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. And there are a couple questions here that we've answered previously, so I will encourage people to go back and take a listen related to incentivization that the city is undertaking. Heather had responded to that. And then tell me if I'm right, team. There's a question here about timing on responses from the province or municipal affairs and housing in particular. When do you anticipate that you'd hear back? I think you answered that one, but maybe it's quicker to just say it again real quick here.
So the province has 90 days to review the proposed draft, which we had provided back in January. So in April, we're expecting if there would be any comments from the province, they would have provided them to us by that time. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, they're under no obligation to provide us comments. When it comes to the draft that we're going to be presenting to council, the draft amendments and draft updates, we're going to be taking feedback that we've received from these virtual open houses, looking at the statutory open houses as well, and making some other slight adjustments. So really the province will be commenting, or won't necessarily be commenting on this, what you see before us now, but what they will see is what council adopts, and they will need to provide us with a response. I think, was it 250 days? Heather can confirm the exact amount of time a decision should be made by the province. They may or may not give us feedback. They might just approve, or they may make changes and approve the amended version. Heather, is there anything else that you might like to add?
No, that's correct, Delia. I believe they have, once we submit to them the council approved official plan amendment, I believe they have 128 days to review that final amendment and then issue their decision one way or another.
Okay, and Heather, I mischaracterized this question about incentives. The person's asking, in addition to the incentives that you described already, will the city consider new incentives to revitalize the core urban area?
Perhaps. I haven't been a part of those discussions to date, but again, I'm not saying that it won't happen. This is an ongoing issue that we're looking at, is planning for these high levels of intensification. So it's something that perhaps could be considered. And I see Christine on there, so maybe she has something to add.
Right. Just recently, I believe it was last fall, the city just completed its review of its existing incentive programs, largely focused on the downtowns, the former downtowns of the former area the downtowns of the former area municipalities, the BIAs, the corridors, and made some changes to those, and they do review those incentive programs I believe, every 5 years. So there's always opportunity to review the existing programs as well as to bring new programs in as we see necessary, and where council is putting its desire and its money. So yes, the opportunity is always there.
Okay. And then our last question in this topic area, these topic areas, has there been any discussion about community benefits in the development process? And there's a specific organization, the Hamilton Community Benefits Network, whether they've been involved in any such discussions.
So the city is in the process of drafting a community benefit charge bylaw. That's something that our finance department is leading, and they will be going out for community consultation on that draft bylaw shortly. I don't know the exact dates, Christine. I'm not sure if you do, but it's in process right now and will undergo public engagement prior to it being finalized. So I don't know, Christine, if you know any of the timing of that consultation or not.
No,
Okay.
I'm not sure the exact timing, but no, I'm not sure of the actual plans that they have. So, but yes, it is, they will be going out for consultation this spring.
Yeah, so I'd say keep your eye on Engage Hamilton. Again, that's where all of our engagement, that's the means for our public engagement processes. So keep an eye on that, and then you'll make sure you don't miss anything. I think you're muted, Tracy.
Indeed, I was. I'm grateful for all of the great questions that have come forward in this section. But let's move on to the next one related to cultural heritage and transportation, because I know we've got questions there as well that have come in. Go ahead, Delia.
Thank you, Tracy. So cultural heritage and transportation are the next two topic areas we'd like to highlight. Beginning with cultural heritage, we have proposed the inclusion of the City of Hamilton land acknowledgement at the beginning of the Urban Hamilton Official Plan to acknowledge the first occupants of this land and to recognize that the city must understand the importance of stewarding this land for future generations. The city and Indigenous communities have a shared interest in land use planning matters and stewardship, so greater emphasis has been added with respect to engagement with Indigenous communities regarding cultural heritage and archaeological resources, as well as the acknowledgement of the spiritual aspect of cultural heritage landscapes. The provincial policy statement, definitions of built heritage resource and cultural heritage landscape, now specify that an Indigenous community may identify the significance of a heritage resource. Other updates include reference to current legislation, regulations, and local documents such as the city's archaeological management plan. Moving on now to transportation. The definition of active transportation now recognizes additional transportation modes, including mobility aids. Policy updates prioritize active transportation and encourage the city to work with other municipalities to ensure a seamless integration of active transportation networks across municipal jurisdictions. The provincial policy framework makes a more clear connection between active transportation and public health with a complete streets approach for the safety of all users, supporting placemaking opportunities and allowances for other emerging design trends. Policy updates also include references to a public transportation network that adapts to a changing climate and reduces greenhouse gas emissions with multi-use paths, trails, and bicycle lanes. And finally, policy updates also include prioritizing transit planning and investment to support priority transit corridors and connections to employment areas. Okay, at this time, we'd like to answer any questions you may have about the cultural heritage or transportation topic area updates.
Thank you. I will jump in with a couple of the pre-submitted questions just to get us rolling here. They're related to parking. Would the City of Hamilton consider revised parking minimums for new developments like the City of Toronto has, for example?
I'm going to allow a member of the zoning team if they may have any comments on the parking, this parking question.
Thanks, Delia. Shannon Mackay, I'm the manager for Zoning and Committee of Adjustment. And we are evaluating parking as we are going through the next stages of our new residential zoning for the comprehensive zoning bylaw. So parking is being assessed for what reductions might be possible and where appropriate. As it stands with the existing zones that have been brought into zoning bylaw 05200, there have been in some cases reductions, and in some cases removal of parking requirements for some uses. So the bylaw as it stands, the new comprehensive bylaw as it stands, is moving in that direction to reassess the priority for parking and, where appropriate, make those modifications for either reductions or eliminations.
Thank you. And Shannon, I'm imagining this one is for you again, but is consideration also being given to tandem parking?
As part of the review for parking, I think some of the design standards and the mechanisms to implement parking is being evaluated. Again, that's coming through the residential zoning process for the comprehensive zoning bylaw.
Okay, we could have fielded these ones under zoning for certain. We've tackled them all under transportation here, so that's great. Let's see here. How did just switching gears, pardon the transportation pun. How did the current urban indigenous strategy inform cultural heritage?
Okay, so the way that we've approached the updates to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan updates have been directly related to the provincial policy updates. So having said that, we have engaged with the our Indigenous coordinator here at the city, Shelley Hill, to assist us in engagement opportunities with Indigenous communities in this area, as well as those beyond our municipal boundaries. So the Indigenous strategy, I believe, is referenced in these updates. But in terms of how are these policy updates addressing that specific strategy, we haven't gone to those details. I would expect that that we might be doing some updates again through the local context phase 3, looking at can we go any further than what the province has said in terms of what we need to address for cultural heritage, for example. But that's where we've been focusing our attention on thus far.
Thank you. There is another question here on cultural heritage. How does this section address topics like climate issues, for food security, water infrastructure, etc., that whole piece related to the 7 generations?
So please forgive me for not being entirely familiar with that 7 generations and some of these details. I think that the question that you've raised and the previous one as well that we've discussed are important for us to consider. And as we look into these matters further, we will be looking at additional updates as necessary as part of this conformity review. So please do, if you would like, if you have any advice or ideas about how they could be incorporated, we would welcome your comments and your ideas. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes. And that 7 generations notion that we're planning for 7 generations in the future, and the decisions and things we do today have that ripple effect for many generations to come. So even beyond, you know, the 50-year or 30-year planning horizon seems like a long one, but this notion of 7 generations certainly takes us even that much further into the future. Okay, let's see here. Are there any comments on potential cultural heritage landscape conservation?
So in terms of identifying cultural heritage landscapes, we haven't included that in these policy updates, primarily because the province hasn't identified any beyond that which we already have, like such as the beach strip, for example. So in terms of if there is a landscape that is culturally significant, I would encourage you to reach out to us or cultural heritage planners within the development section of this, it's a newly formed section within the planning division for advice about how to recognize a new cultural heritage landscape. So like a cultural heritage designation for a building, for example, there would be a process to identify a cultural heritage landscape, which I'm not personally familiar with. I have not had gone through that process, but I understand there would be staff here at the city who would be able to do that. So at the present time, our policy updates don't reference any new cultural heritage landscapes. Perhaps in future with the local context, that might be a component of that local review. But at this present time, there are no additions.
Okay, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
I was just going to add that the official plan already has quite detailed policies on cultural heritage landscapes in there, and we have incorporated cultural heritage landscapes in some of the planning projects, secondary plan work that we've done over the last 5 years. So you can go back into the OP and review those, and certainly contact us if there's questions, or if you are seeing something missing that may relate to the provincial policy conformity.
Okay, thank you. And so since we did the other parking related questions in this section, we'll do the parking question, and then the other questions we haven't answered really do relate to a topic that's coming up, growth management, urban structure and zoning. So we will take those questions down into that section. But just to keep all of the parking ones together, there's a question about whether the new parking rules will allow more than one car to be parked in a long driveway. So I'm imagining that may be for the zone, for Shannon, somebody in the zoning group, but I'm not sure.
Hi, at this time, with regards to the work that's implementing the official plan amendment here, the rules as it relates to the long driveways, each of the former municipal zoning bylaws, and Elaine, I'll get into this later. We're not touching those rules as it relates to the general provisions and parking regulations related to each of the former municipal zoning bylaws. As we move into the residential zoning component for the comprehensive zoning bylaw, again, this will be kind of further explained during Alana's presentation. Those kind of design parameters would be evaluated to determine if it's appropriate to allow for more than one parking space. I'm going to make an assumption in the front yard as opposed to a long driveway.
Okay, thank you so much. And as I said, we will port some of these questions down into the growth management, urban structure and zoning section, which is coming right up. And we'll move on now to the climate related and infrastructure sections.
Thank you, Tracy. So we're going to move on now to climate related and infrastructure topic areas. Policy updates within the climate-related topic area include preparing for the impacts of a changing climate, including assessment of infrastructure risks, vulnerabilities, and impacts of extreme weather, the incorporation of energy conservation techniques for municipally owned facilities, and the use of low-impact development techniques and green infrastructure, among others. Reference to the city's climate change adaptation plan is also included in the updates, as well as updated targets to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. However, these targets are expected to be updated further once Council endorses the city's Community Energy and Emissions Plan, anticipated later this year. In terms of infrastructure, policy updates that complement those under the climate-related topic area through the introduction of green infrastructure such as green roof, low-impact development techniques, and green spaces to reduce the impacts of a changing climate. Reference is also made to the preparation and update of an urban forest strategy, which is currently in process. Other updates include optimization, existing infrastructure, and community services and facilities, as well as promoting the adaptive reuse of existing infrastructure and community services and facilities. Updated requirements related to the city's water, wastewater, and stormwater management master plans are also included. Finally, there is an existing policy within the official plan that the city may allow existing lots and existing uses that front onto urban-rural roads, boundary road, to connect with existing municipal water and wastewater services, subject to conditions. However, the recent update to the Niagara Escarpment Plan prohibits extensions to lands within the escarpment natural, escarpment protection, and escarpment rural designations. Therefore, an update is required to the official plan to ensure its conformity with the Niagara Escarpment Plan. At this time, we would like to answer any questions you may have about the climate-related or infrastructure topic area updates.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see here. We have one. And I'm not sure if it's in the right category here, but let's take this one to kick off this section. How will you ensure that natural heritage features such as wetlands and forest cover will be protected under the new official plan?
Okay, that's a good question. So we currently have policies that prohibit development within core areas and natural heritage features. The mapping of these areas and the refinements to the natural heritage system mapping will take place at a future phase. That would be phase 2 when we're looking at the rural Hamilton official plan and the systems related to it, so the agricultural and the natural heritage system. So there are policies already in place, but any changes to the mapping would take place in the future phase.
Okay, thank you. And Delia, oh, go ahead, Christine. Nope. Okay.
No, we're fine. We're fine.
Okay. Is stormwater management included? And if so, how and where?
So we again, we have current policies in the official plan that talk about stormwater management. There are some updates that and enhancements that we're having, including green infrastructure. So we're looking at encouraging the incorporation of green roofs, of low impact development techniques like greenways along roadways or in appropriate locations to help reduce the amount of stormwater runoff that happens with storm events. So those are included as updates to this, but I'm not sure if there was anything beyond that.
Sure. How about, to be more specific, does low impact development include permeable pavers as an alternate to storm sewers or storm water management ponds? And are there incentives for using these types of techniques?
So Yes, permeable pavers are identified generally of being low impact development. And yeah, we've got some policies there already. Just looking through some of the updates. So I
Hi,
know that,
well,
go ahead,
oh, sorry, if you were looking for
Christine.
something, Delia,
Yeah,
I'd just jump in.
no,
It's a pretty specific question, and you know, the use of permeable pavers is going to be appropriate in different applications, and that's something that our engineering folks and the folks that are reviewing site plans and grading plans and stormwater plans at a development level would be looking at. Certainly they are, you know, one technique that is considered a low impact development approach. But there are others as well. So you may not see something specific in the official plan about that, but other work being done to develop that LID, low impact development standards, would be considering those elements as well as engineering standards.
Okay, and so maybe to step it up to a more global scale, what work is being done to ensure that developments are being designed and built to a standard that will mitigate anticipated climate impacts?
So the city is working on, and staff are working on developing some sustainable building and development standards. Like there are standards in other municipalities requesting when development applications come forward that developers identify what techniques they're planning to use. Are they using local species? Are they you know, I guess the permeable pavers and other low impact development techniques, green roofs, etc. So the city is looking at opportunities to encourage green development standards and building development standards that and that is coupled with some other projects that are underway. So it's not part of this particular project, this official plan review for conformity, but it's something that the city is investigating, and we'll be looking forward to bringing forward some options for consideration to council sometime later this year, perhaps.
Thanks, Delia. And I just wanted to add to that ongoing right now are updates to the city's water, wastewater, and stormwater master plans, which through those processes are also looking at requirements related to development standards and ensuring that we're planning for impacts of a changing climate, including those extreme and severe weather events. So those processes are ongoing, those updates are ongoing. And so we'll see what perhaps new standards or guidelines come out of those master plan updates related to some of these questions as well.
Thank you. And are combined sewers being addressed?
So,
There you go.
yeah, Christine, if you wanted to answer that question, you can.
I'm not 100% certain. That is part of the master plan, probably the master plan or the stormwater master plan project. So I imagine it would be, because it's a big element of our system. The separated systems and the combined systems have to work together. So I'm sure that they are looking at those elements.
Okay. And there was a section that went by really quickly for people. What prohibitions are being examined or removed in the Niagara Escarpment?
Okay, so just yeah, to highlight what was happening there. So the Niagara Escarpment Plan, when it was updated in 2017 through the province's coordinated review, they provided a new policy or created a new policy that would prohibit the extension of water and wastewater services to existing lots and uses that front on an urban boundary road within, I think, the Niagara Escarpment Protection Natural Area. I forget, I'm sorry, the third one. But essentially, the city would otherwise allow those lots and existing uses along boundary roads to connect to municipal services when they had capacity or when they became available. But in the case of the Niagara Escarpment Plan, because the province introduced this new policy prohibiting the extension to those land use designations within their Niagara Escarpment Plan, we then in turn have to update our official plans to say the same thing so that we are conforming to the provincial policies.
Thank you. Okay, is it part of the official plan review to require new buildings to have zero emissions of greenhouse gases and to require parking spaces in underground and above ground parking lots to allow charging of EV electric vehicles?
Sorry, specifically, those details are not part of the conformity update. However, the higher level policies are. So we are encouraging the use of electric vehicles as a policy update. We're encouraging, yeah, for electric vehicles. But when it comes down to the details, that will be implemented through the zoning bylaw and through other means. So as far as development is concerned, as I mentioned, the city is looking at coming up with a list of building developments, green development and building design standards. The idea of embodied carbon and how the development is addressing or reducing its impacts of it on the climate. That's something that is a separate project that does feed in and is encouraged by the official plan policy updates we're presenting now.
Okay, thank you. And one more here. The new policy, and there's specific here, B3247, encourages the use of locally sourced materials in both new construction and retrofits to reduce carbon impact. How will you encourage this use?
So one of the policy updates proposed does include the incorporation of locally sourced materials to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from, say, trucks bringing those materials from a further location. So the updates are addressing that concept of locally sourced materials in the in local development and redevelopment proposals.
Thank you. And how will the city protect older growth forests and trees through this process?
The city has identified in these updates the urban forest strategy that is being developed and will be presented to council. So through that urban forest strategy, there will be, I'm sure, some protection for those urban old growth forests and trees. I'll let Christine add anything further.
Sure. As we mentioned before, we have natural heritage policies already in the official plan that are very, very strong, and they reflect the strength of the provincial policies as well. So they do protect significant forests or woodlands, significant woodlands they're called, and there are specific processes involved for studying natural areas prior to any approvals of development to ensure that there's no loss of that natural heritage resource. So those are already in place. Those policies and those processes are already in place.
Okay, two more kind of rapid questions here, and we will, again, in the interest of time, move on to the next section then. Is there any consideration of banning gas furnaces through this process, and what would it take for this to be pursued?
So again, the current exercise, the phase 1 of this official plan review, is based on conformity with provincial policies. So there isn't, from a land use planning perspective, any prohibition of new those new furnaces. And so it's not included. However, if it's been determined through consultation and or perhaps identified at the local context, phase 3, that we include some terminology that could be contemplated.
Thank you. And since you mentioned consultation, was there consultation to inform the section about climate-related issues, and specifically with some of the Hamilton specific environmental groups?
So later this week, staff will be engaging in stakeholder consultation, which includes those who have been on the Grids 2 engagement process, who have been involved in that. And that includes such groups as Conservation Hamilton, the Hamilton Conservation Authority, Environment Hamilton, and others. As well as the building industry. So we are engaging with those stakeholders, and we will be receiving comments through Engage Hamilton or through the Grids 2 MCR official plan review email address. So
Thank you. So if people haven't yet been involved, they are more than welcome to provide their feedback, and we'll give you back that information again at the end. And lastly, but not leastly, have you looked at deconstruction policies as an alternative to demolition to provide an incentive to recycle construction materials? And some examples have been given, such as Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver.
So the policy update, I believe, in the section that mentions locally sourced materials, also encourages the reuse of existing buildings and materials. So, so that is something that is contemplated with these updates.
Amazing. And with that positive news, let's move on to section D, which is growth management, firm boundary, and urban structure and zoning.
Okay, so through these sections, the growth management, firm urban boundary, and urban structure topic areas, we will be highlighting the policy updates related to those. We will also be highlighting proposed zoning bylaw amendments to the zoning bylaws of the former communities to apply to lands outside secondary plan areas. These topic areas have been grouped together because some of the updates relate directly to Council's decision for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. Under the growth management topic area, policy updates include reference to our Future Hamilton, which is the city's 25-year community plan that reflects the values and aspirations of Hamiltonians, as well as references to Grids 2, the city's growth strategy to accommodate population and employment growth to the year 2051. Updates also include revised growth plan population and employment growth targets, intensification targets, policies affirming that the city will accommodate all new housing units within the existing urban area, and that only at the time of the Municipal Comprehensive Review will any possible adjustments be made to the urban boundary, provided there is no net increase in land. So if all growth is to occur within the existing urban area, amendments to the Rural Hamilton Official Plan are also necessary. These updates include policy reference to a firm urban boundary, the inclusion of a policy that specialty crop and rural lands may not be redesignated for non-agricultural purposes, which is similar to one already in place prohibiting the conversion of agricultural land, and the deletion of Special Policy Area B, Future Urban Growth Node, known as Alfreda. Policy updates under the urban structure topic area include the introduction of policies describing major transit station areas as strategic growth areas, intensification and higher density mixed uses in a transit supportive and compact built form shall be encouraged and promoted in these areas. Intensification, redevelopment, and compact form throughout the urban area. The addition of fourplexes and multiple dwellings up to a maximum of 6 dwelling units within low-density residential areas without the need for an official plan amendment, and updates to the residential density range policies within the neighborhoods designation as a measure to be used for the purpose of preparing secondary plans and master plans only, and not to be applied on a site-by-site basis. This policy change is intended to increase flexibility and facilitate development approvals without the need for an official plan amendment related to density only. Additional policies to ensure compatibility with adjacent uses have also been added. The following list highlights the policy updates related to Council's decision for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. Focusing on the urban Hamilton official plan, increased intensification and density targets are referenced. For example, the city's intensification target has increased from 40 to 80%, and the downtown urban growth center density target has increased from 250 to 500 people and jobs per hectare. Urban boundary expansion policies have also been removed. The addition of a policy prohibiting urban boundary expansions in advance of the next Municipal Comprehensive Review have been added. Amendments to Chapter E3 neighborhoods to permit a broader range of uses in low-density residential areas and added flexibility to residential density categories. In order to implement the official plan policy updates to support all projected population and employment growth within the existing urban area, as I said earlier, amendments to the zoning bylaws of the formal communities are necessary. At this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Alana Fulford, planner within the zoning reform team, to highlight the proposed updates to the zoning bylaws for the former communities.
Thank you, Delia. So the zoning bylaws are the primary mechanism to implement the policies of official plans. And in the city of Hamilton, zoning bylaw 05200 is the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw, which applies citywide. But as has been mentioned, there are still the zoning bylaws of the former communities, that being Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Glanbrook, the former city of Hamilton, and Stony Creek. The residential zones in these zoning bylaws still apply in each former community. Small-scale intensification opportunities are proposed for the city's low-density areas to implement council's approval of a no urban boundary growth option and the resulting draft policy changes to the urban Hamilton official plan. And when speaking of low-density areas, these are the neighborhoods across the city, which are predominantly made up of single detached dwellings. So providing more opportunities for intensification in these low density areas may be achieved by allowing a broader range of housing types in these areas. So in addition to single detached dwellings, that means permitting semi-detached dwellings, duplex dwellings, triplexes and fourplexes, and street townhouses. Between all 6 former community zoning bylaws, there are a lot of existing low density residential zones. There are over 40, in fact, and a fair number of these existing low-density residential zones only permit single detached dwellings. So it's this broader range of housing types that would be permitted in these zones. And at this time, as this is intended sort of as a first step going forward, we are proposing to permit triplexes and fourplexes through conversions only, meaning adding units within existing dwellings. So these changes are proposed as an interim step, providing opportunities for small-scale intensification to implement Council's direction. A mix of housing types and neighborhoods provides small-scale intensification opportunities, as well as housing choices for residents. And I would just like to take a moment to talk briefly about the proposed changes in the context of the city's residential zoning project, which many of you may be aware of, and it has been mentioned briefly through some previous comments this afternoon. The residential zoning project, which is ongoing, is a comprehensive zoning project which will introduce new residential zones to zoning bylaw 05200. These new residential zones will replace the existing residential zones of the former community zoning bylaws. The result is that there will be one set of residential zones citywide with a common set of zoning regulations instead of the over 40 residential zones and corresponding regulations that presently exist today. Staff have been actively working on phase 1 of the project, which will introduce new low-density residential zones to 05200. With Council's approval of a no urban boundary expansion growth option, the changes being presented today to expand the housing types permitted in low-density areas is an interim step to implement Council's direction. It's considered an interim step in a few ways, in that the changes are proposed to the low-density residential zones of the former community zoning bylaws, whereas new residential zones in 05200 will ultimately replace these zones, and also interim in that it will inform the residential zoning project going forward, which is a comprehensive undertaking to evaluate and recommend new residential zones and zoning regulations for the entire city. Now, the residential zoning project is a public process, so once the first phase of the project is complete, the draft low density residential zones will be presented to the public for fulsome consultation. So I'll now turn it back over to Delia, who will lead us into our final topic Q&A.
So at this time, we'd like to answer any questions that you may have about the growth management, the firm urban boundary, urban structure, or zoning bylaw amendment topic areas.
Certainly, thank you very much. And we have addressed some of these questions in previous sections. So, and in the interest of time, we will move through as many as we can here in short order. Will this process change secondary plans that are in place or in progress?
Okay, so staff recognizes that extensive consultation has already taken place with the secondary planning process. So at the present time, we're not proposing any updates to those secondary plans. If changes are proposed to secondary plans in the future, we'll be undertaking a separate public consultation with respect to those.
Okay, thank you. Is there consideration of restoring the density target in greenfield areas to 80 people plus jobs per hectare to support transit in those areas?
So I was looking at those targets. The greenfield density target that we currently have in our official plan is 50 people and jobs per hectare, and we're looking to increase that to 60 people and jobs per hectare. I'm not sure where the 80 came from, but I'm not sure if Heather has a comment on that. But we're certainly
Sure.
thanks, Heather.
I was just going to say, Delia, I think the 80 persons and jobs per hectare, it's a mouthful, came from a previous version of the growth plan, which had at one point been proposing that as the minimum density target in greenfield areas. And I just want to note, so our designating greenfield areas, those are areas within our existing urban boundary that are so far undeveloped for the most part. They're generally vacant, but there's not very much greenfield land. Comparatively, most of our land is already developed. But a lot of those greenfield areas, although they may appear vacant today, they already have development approvals already either in process or in place on those lands. So there's very little opportunity within those designated greenfield areas to really see a significant increase in density. And that density target that we have set at 60 persons and jobs per hectare is measured across the entirety of our designated greenfield area. So it takes into account those areas that already have approvals in place, as well as some more undeveloped lands like our Fruitland-Winona secondary plan area. So we expect that those newer areas like Fruitland-Winona will continue to be developed at a higher density. It has a target of 70 persons and jobs per hectare already in place, but the target is set in our official plan at 60 because it does have to compensate for those areas that are already developed at a lower density or already have approvals in place at a lower density.
Thank you. And speaking of those lower density areas, what will you do if those lower density areas that include vacant lands, dilapidated buildings are not redeveloped by their landowners and developers?
I can take a shot at that one, Delia, if you like. So again, as we talked about a little bit at the beginning, the development process is property owner driven. We can't necessarily as a city force somebody to bring forward their property for development. That being said, I do know the city is right now looking at a vacant residential land tax, which would provide an incentive for property owners to or perhaps a disincentive to leave lands vacant and provide that incentive to actually bring them forward for development. So as I said, as we talked about previously, we're putting the pieces in place to try to encourage those lands to come forward for development, but we are not in a position to force that to occur. It does need to be property owner driven.
Okay. What is the difference between using zoning bylaws versus design guidelines to influence the character and quality of Hamilton's built form, and which one does Hamilton use?
I can speak to that one. The zoning bylaws are sort of a legal document. They're very black and white. And there is sort of a scope in terms of what they can contain. So when it comes to things like character, like types of material, certain looks, I mean, there is only so much that the zoning bylaw can do. And so you'll see design guidelines which speak to more of those character pieces. They are guidelines, so they are intended to guide. They are not sort of like a legal you must you must do kind of a document. They are intended to work together. So Hamilton has the zoning bylaws as well as design guidelines that speak to that urban design type component. We are looking at updating and providing certain more guidance to residential development, to low density residential development. I'll ask Shannon to speak to that in a little more detail as she's more familiar.
Yes, the city is working on an updated urban design guidelines standard for the city to be applied citywide, which would eventually replace our site plan guidelines. That work is currently underway and is hopefully going to support and reinforce the residential zoning coming forward for the comprehensive zoning bylaw project.
Okay, and regarding the bylaws, is there a time estimate for the incorporation of the residential land use bylaw into 05-200?
So in addition to the work that's being done to support this official plan amendment, staff are currently working on the comprehensive zoning bylaw for the residential zones, which is the last remaining portion of 05-200 zoning bylaw 05-200 to be completed. At this point, it is a project that has been underway for a little while, and we're hoping to bring forward probably in 2023, just given this work that had to be completed to implement the official plan amendment.
Okay, excellent. Regarding parking in front of dwellings, I'm going to try and link two of this person's questions. I just remind people to send all of their questions to all panelists, and we are getting very short on time. So the The questions that we don't answer will land in the Q&A document after the session. We do have a couple here to clear up that will clear up, and then we'll go to the last section. So if people could hold their questions for now so we can clear these ones, that'll be great. Okay. Will the 50% landscape still be in place as a bylaw? And that's regarding parking in the front of a dwelling. And then a second part is if parking is an issue for ratepayers, what is their recourse?
The 50% landscaping is definitely something that is going to be evaluated and is being evaluated through the residential zoning project. And particularly, I think that, there's a recognition of a need to, in light of intensification, and that's sort of the direction that we've been giving, that there's also a need to ensure that there's appropriate degree of pervious surfaces to allow for drainage, especially with that intensification occurring. So, I can't provide a response specifically at this time, but that is something that will be reviewed through the residential zoning project and brought forward through phase one, the results of the phase one work.
Okay, and
Yep,
just in
second
terms of
part.
the work that's being done, are you looking at best practices from elsewhere?
In terms of zoning regulations and developing new zones and zoning regulations, that's absolutely something that is part of the evaluation process. So we look to other, municipalities that may have, I guess, a similar context to ours, as well as what would be considered sort of newer or best practices in the field. So that's certainly a component of our evaluation.
Okay, and why triplex, fourplex permissions only in existing buildings and not purpose-built?
Yeah, and really the question of conversions is really about we are taking this interim step to implement council's direction. And we're dealing with, making these changes to the existing zoning bylaws of the former communities and working within each of those frameworks and structures of the zoning bylaws. So that conversion piece is intended as an interim step, but certainly a consideration of a full range of new low density residential uses is intended through the residential zoning project.
And Alana, I believe I heard you say that these would be applied across the entirety of the city of Hamilton.
Right. So what comes forward for the low density residential areas for 05200 is to be applied citywide.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to turn it back to Delia to go into the last section.
Thank you, Tracy. So for the next few weeks, the city will continue to engage in early consultation with the public on the proposed draft official plan amendments to receive initial feedback from the public and stakeholders on the proposed updates. We have updated project web pages, posted notices at libraries, and we will continue to advertise in newspapers and on social media platforms, seeking input from the public on the proposed updates to the official plans. The city will, as I said earlier, will be hosting targeted meetings with stakeholders, also with Indigenous community members and others. Statutory engagement is that which is required by the Planning Act, whereas non-statutory engagement is additional consultation with the community for the benefit of finalizing the official plan amendments. Following the province's 90-day review period of the draft official plan amendments, the city will host a statutory open house and a statutory public meeting as per the Planning Act requirements, including newspaper notices. This slide indicates the next steps in the work plan for this first phase of the official plan review. The City has commenced the non-statutory public consultation, which is what we're doing now, on the proposed amendments, and will continue into March. Once the ministerial 90-day review period has ended, the City will provide notice of statutory open house and statutory public meeting to be held in late April and early May respectively. Following Council adoption of the official plan amendments in late May or early June, we will forward the official plan amendments to the province for ministerial approval. This work plan will ensure the City meets the province's July 1st deadline for conformity amendments. If you would like to learn more about the official plan review project, updates on the current municipal comprehensive review component, as well as topic areas to be considered in future phases, we would encourage you to visit the official plan review webpage. A recent update to the official plan review webpage is the addition of track changes versions of the proposed updates to the official plans so that you may review current and proposed policy amendments. Also, you can check out the Grids 2 Municipal Comprehensive Review webpage to learn more about the steps involved in developing and completing the city's strategy for accommodating future population and employment growth. We have also referenced links to the city's current urban and rural Hamilton official plan web pages, where you may access current official plan policies and mapping. At this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Tracy for concluding remarks.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for all of the presentation materials, as well as to participants today for all of the great questions. We tried to touch on each and every one of them in some way, shape, or form. We will be taking those questions and turning them into a question and answer document that will be posted on the website you see here in front of you. There were a few questions or comments about specific groups, people, organizations, did we consult with them? And all are welcome. Please feel free to forward the invitation to your friends, neighbors, and if people have comments, they are welcome to add them to this kind of official consultation work that's happening now. It's a huge, huge piece of work, and certainly all of the input is supporting, helping the thinking, the refining, and what will eventually be passed along for approval. So I would like to again say thank you. Everybody have a wonderful and safe afternoon moving forward, and we'll look forward to re-engaging with people in the engagement activities that are to come. So thanks to one and all, and have yourselves a great day.